capacity to become a hurricane, but what strength will it be when it's nearest land, and who's going to get the worst wind and water? That's really tough to pinpoint. The track models from the U.S. Weather Service models are a pretty good indication of how erratic the motion might be. That's just over the next couple of days when we're pretty confident it's going to get closer to the coast. But look at this looping, stalling, meandering motion near the coastline. Now, eventually, the models start to agree on a northeastward path, but how close to the Texas coast will that be? I don't know. But eventually, this could affect Louisiana. Now, we don't have any hurricane watches up or storm surge watches up. Those are probably coming later tonight, if not tomorrow morning, because then we will be within 48 hours of the expected time of winds of tropical storm force. Now, the first day that we think we're going to have a flash flood risk along the entire Texas coast, not everybody, but a lot of you will be at risk, would be Sunday. But this risk could go up if it moves farther west between now and Sunday. And then the risk could remain very high into Monday, into Tuesday. Just take the European model, for example. Here it is this time on Sunday, getting dangerously close to the coast. That's why the flood risk starts then. But oh my goodness, could it get worse on Monday and Tuesday for just about everybody on the Texas coast and inland? This could be a flooding disaster for somebody or a lot of people in Texas, maybe even in other states, Jackie.
And some of those models bring it pretty close to where Hannah was as well. Well, elsewhere, it is going to be a fabulous weekend. So let's talk about something good for a moment, shall we? It's going to be feeling like fall for millions of Americans from the Midwest to the East Coast, even in parts of the Southeast. You're feeling a taste of it already in many of these cities. And boy, you're going to get out the sweaters this weekend. I'm telling you that. You're going to get out the blue jeans. I can't remember the last time I put on a pair of jeans that weren't jean shorts, right? Pumpkin spice lattes. You won't be shamed if you drink those because it's going to be fall-like for sure. We're almost there anyway on the calendar. Jet stream dipping down across the Great Lakes and into the Northeast. And we've got high pressure at the surface. It's going to be ushering in those winds from the north-northeast. So that's a much drier flow. It's a much cooler flow. And look at how far south the cold front goes, all the way into Florida. So all that lingering moisture, it's been so humid, I know, into the southeast, that's going to work its way out as well. Check it out, potential record lows. We're talking 30s. We've got frost advisories into the interior parts of the Northeast, but afternoon temperatures are going to be in the 60s. Get out there and enjoy it. Coming up tonight on Weather Underground, we're tracking tremendous tropical activity in the Atlantic Basin, including newly named Tropical Storm Beta that could threaten the Gulf Coast. This time, it's eastern Texas on alert. And powerful Hurricane Teddy churning in the mid-Atlantic, threatening rip currents and coastal flooding to the U.S. eastern seaboard.
Wilfred rounding out the list of tropical storm names for the 2020 season, forcing a rare need to use the Greek alphabet for additional names. We're going to show you where Wilfred is headed and the rare records Alpha has already set and when Beta could threaten the U.S. Not only has 2020 been a very active hurricane season, but another busy year for billion-dollar weather disasters. And the numbers, they keep going up. Could 2020 set the all-time record? And are we doing enough to combat the staggering costs? That's next on Weather Underground. Welcome in. We've made it to Friday. It's been a long week, folks. Glad you're with us. I'm Mike Bettis. She's Jackie Jarris. And if you haven't tuned in since maybe last night's show, Jackie, you have missed a ton.
A ton. We've got 3 named storms just today. It's like you almost have to laugh because otherwise you cry.
It's ridiculous. It's a record 3 named storms in a 24-hour period. In fact, they all happen in 6 hours. And now we're tracking Tropical Storm Beta close to home. It's formed in the Gulf of Mexico, forecast to become a hurricane. A lot of questions about how strong this could be, where it could go. So let's bring in our expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, for the lowdown on this one. Dr. Knabb.
Yeah, Mike, this is going to be another category slow storm that is not going to behave itself. It's going to be harder to forecast the track and the intensity because the steering currents, like in Sally, are not going to be well defined. But we do know that it is going to get dangerously close to the coastline over the weekend and certainly into early next week. This could be a wind and water, especially water, disaster for one or more communities. So don't write this off because it is only a tropical storm. It's going to get stronger and it's going to get closer. Max winds at 40 miles an hour, moving north-northeast at 9. That's going to be slower. It's going to get down to 2 or 3 miles an hour, kind of like Sally did when it gets closer to the coastline. There is a middle upper-level trough over Texas and Mexico. That's providing some of the wind shear, and there will be enough shear present to probably keep this from blowing up to a major hurricane. Famous last words, I know, but it doesn't look like that is in the cards here. But weak enough shear and certainly warm enough waters to allow this to strengthen to a strong tropical storm, perhaps a hurricane along the way. But also, that trough is going to steer the system northward, northeastward for the next day or two. But then this trough is going to go bye-bye, and then this big ridge is going to take up residence over the center part of the country. But that ridge is going to be distant and pretty weak, and that's going to provide a weak nudge to the west, generally speaking, toward the coast. And that's why we're pretty confident it gets closer to the coast. What we're not confident in is exactly where it goes relative to the coast, how close it is, does it rake the entire Texas coast. But it looks like some version of this system is going to get up into Louisiana and thereabouts at some point. So don't think just because you're not in the cone that you're not in danger at some point. But it's going to be, if it does end up being a disaster for somebody, it's going to happen in slow motion here. Again, please don't assume that it's going to follow this line down the middle. That's just to give you an idea of where the forecast points are. Otherwise, the cone would just look like a squash bug and you wouldn't be able to understand what's going on. But it could spend a lot of time farther offshore, farther northeast than that track. It could go south of this track. It could go inland, could be right along the coast, and it will be inconsistent motion. It will stop and start and loop. And that's not good news when it's probably going to do that close enough to the coast, if not on shore, to dump tremendous amounts of rainfall. And this could be low. If it goes farther inland and spends more time near or over the coast or inland, we could have multiple feet of rain like we did in Sally. I hope not, but that's at least a possibility depending upon where it spends all of its time. So we're going to be right there teetering on the edge of a water disaster here. Hopefully it stays far enough offshore. But look at what the European model does, just as an example. There's that northward motion initially and then that motion toward the coast. So by late in this weekend, things could be changing big time. And because it will be close to the coast by this time Sunday, later tonight, early tomorrow morning, hurricane and storm surge watches could go up. But then look at how much rain could fall with a Category slow storm near the coastline, anywhere from Brownsville to Beaumont, including the Houston area, Mike, could be at risk here for some very heavy rainfall. Now, I'm not saying you are going to get it. You're just at risk for it.
What it means is we have to keep our eye on it. You just cannot take your eye off the tropics this time of year. You said it before too, Dr. Ebb, especially in the Gulf. You cannot take your eyes off of anything in the Gulf. But between beta and the fact that we've run through the list of names this year, we know you have a ton of questions about what's going on. Send them to us on Facebook or on Twitter. Make sure to include the hashtag hurricane questions. We will answer as many as we can for you tonight. Dr. Nab is here at our beck and call. Did you hear that, Dr. Nab? Here at our beck and call, so just be on standby for these questions. Hey, you know, though, folks, it is a very long road to recovery here after Hurricane Sally made landfall in Gulf Shores, Alabama 2 days ago. Today, hundreds of cars lining up to get into this one single gas station, fueling up their cars, fueling up their cans for the generators. More than 270,000 customers still without power in Alabama and Florida. The damage from Sally, extensive too, by the way. On the ground, we've had downed trees, debris littering the streets and yards here. But maybe a better way to view what happened to some of these families and how first responders are up against it, we've got to go to the sky. And that's what our Dave Malkoff did.
We're aboard a helicopter run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations. We are leaving from Mobile, Alabama, going to where this Pensacola Bridge literally cracked in half.
It's sad. It just shows you how high the winds must have been to break these barges loose.
In at least 2 locations, you can see how the barges crashed into the bridge, collapsing huge sections that connect the mainland to Gulf Breeze and Pensacola Beach. A trip that took 9 minutes last week will now take more than an hour for people who live and work here.
The inconvenience, the stress, the hassle with all that's going on in the world, now you have to throw a hurricane on top of it. All those things combined, you know, it can be overwhelming.
It's really shocking to see it up close like this. The Pensacola Bay Bridge, also known as the 3 Mile Bridge, is basically brand new after a $500 million replacement project that just ended 7 months ago.
Other runaway barges in Pensacola Bay slammed right into neighborhoods.
75 or 80-foot barge that's washed ashore and is nearly up into somebody's front porch.
It's going to be a while, right?
It is. We went through Hurricane Katrina, those of us in New Orleans 15 years ago, and we had the massive loss of bridges and infrastructure and so forth. So sadly, the folks of Pensacola are going to be inconvenienced for quite some time.
Fancy yachts are piled up everywhere, even twisted in dry dock as the eye wall ravaged this area. Around Perdido Key, we saw a home where one wall just exploded onto the house next door. Resorts with their roofs sliced off. And just hours after the hurricane, with streets still flooded, we saw roofers already on the job.
We were over here yesterday afternoon as the hurricane was still moving on shore, assessing the situation and see what we could do.
In Orange Beach, the same city where one person died, these two homes were still smoldering after a post-hurricane fire burned them both to the ground. In a Facebook post, firefighters showed how they pulled 1,000 feet of hose through 3 feet of floodwater at 4 a.m. to keep the fire from spreading to other homes.
Yeah, all this just causes stress in people's lives. Everybody wants to go back to normalcy.
This is Gulf Shores, Alabama, where Hurricane Sally roared ashore with sustained winds well over 100 miles an hour.
With a hurricane season this active, this destructive, normal life won't be returning to the Gulf Coast for a long time. High above the Florida-Alabama shore, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
So it's just a little over 2 days ago that Sally made landfall in Gulf Shores, Alabama with 105-mile-per winds at a Category 2. The first hurricane to make landfall here in Alabama in 16 years. It was Hurricane Ivan before that, and the two actually happened on the same day, September 16th, 16 years apart. You look at some of the before and after pictures, it gives you a telling story here. This is Fort Morgan. This is in the peninsula that's about 20 miles west of where Gulf Shores is. See all the docks here, see all the homes. These are all elevated homes. Watch this now, the after. A lot of the docks are taken out. Almost all the homes are intact, right? New building codes after Ivan, new buildings in general, and they all withstood. The roofs all look good even. But look at all the water intrusion behind them here, so they got some high water all around them. Then you take a look at Gulf Shores and the beaches here and the dunes that have been built up, beach replenishment, new resorts at the water's edge here. The resorts did great, by the way. Now, a lot of water at the beaches here and beach erosion that occurred, but the dunes did their job. Look at the pools. They look great. You know, during Hurricane Ivan, the beach was in the pools. There's a little bit of roof damage here, but otherwise, I think they did really, really well here. Again, beach replenishment, new dunes, new building codes, all working in our favor here. There's Gulf Shores, and again, a few neighborhoods here where water came in, but buildings that are raised, roofs that are fortified here, all the homes still look to be intact. The land underneath them, not necessarily, Jackie, and that for some of them may be the issue. We'll have to do more beach replenishment and actually fill back in some of the gaps that we now have, even from one neighbor to the next.
Yeah, interesting to see all those structures look like they did pretty okay there. Well, it's a different battle against nature in California. Nearly 2 weeks after it started, crews are still trying to get the upper hand on the El Dorado fire burning east of Los Angeles. The fire has scorched more than 21,000 acres, and it's only 66% contained right now. The number of acres, you know, the records just keep on going here with the wildfires too. Remember when we got up to 2 million? Well, now we're at 3 million, believe it or not. So all those red areas indicating the areas that have been consumed by these fires. In fact, I was just checking on Twitter with some of the latest out of Los Angeles. There's some new evacuations that have just been ordered. So this is still ongoing. It's a story that doesn't want to end. Gusty winds, just dry vegetation, and those bark beetles have really done a number here on the state, leading to so many different huge fires, but also complexes of fires. Prior to 2020, you know, 2018 was really kind of the benchmark year in terms of numbers of acres burned. And now we've replaced all of those large fires, other than number 2, the Mendocino fire in 2018, with new fires that have happened here in 2020. So it really gives you an idea how unprecedented this has been. We've got red flag warnings flying mostly in the interior today. We've got a trough that's moving in from the Pacific, and that's bringing onshore flow. So the humidity has been increasing, and that's a little bit of good news. Our winds are gustiest on the interior, and that's going to be the case, we think, as we head into the weekend. Humidity is still going to be pretty low, especially in the late afternoon hours, down to critical levels at times. Anytime you're below 25%, that's not a good thing. So as we look at the numbers during the day, not bad. Then later in the afternoon, getting down into the teens. Well, more than 24 fires are burning in California alone. And the cause for these fires varies from human to lightning. But one thing is for sure, this is a disaster that's been years in the making. Meteorologist Carl Parker explains how years of a warming planet have fueled the fires.
California's wildfires are more than a crisis. It's actually a series of crises that began nearly a decade ago. California suffered a devastating drought from 2012 to 2016, and according to a report by the American Geophysical Union, rings in very old trees found that the drought was likely the worst in 1,200 years. And the role of climate change is clear. Millions of drought-stressed trees in California forests were low on sap, which is their natural defense against the bark beetle. The beetles took down more than 160 million trees, and that's where some of the largest fires are burning today. Already this year, more than 2 million acres have been scorched, far more than the previous annual record. It's a domino effect that is leading to a public health crisis. Wildfire smoke has been linked to all types of respiratory distress, including COVID-19. Smoke contains very tiny particles that can enter the bloodstream, increasing risks to the heart.
There's certainly work to be done. The overarching problem is higher temperatures, and really the only way to address that is the issue of greenhouse gases and climate change.
These situations vividly illustrate the enormous threat to our future.
All right, we know that rain would be a good thing for us in the Northwest, just plagued by the fires. Not just rain, but even thunderstorms in Beaverton, Oregon here. And the rain is well placed. It's coming in the exact spots we need it to. But it does also come with another risk. I'm going to briefly talk about what that is here straight ahead. But love to see the radar finally have something on it for a change. Showers and thunderstorms, Nevada up through Idaho. Idaho has really seen an acceleration in fires in the last month or so. And certainly here across the Cascades, Oregon back down through Washington back down through Oregon here. And the rain is really helping our air quality as well. So you might see that improvement and maybe just helping firefighters gain an upper hand on these that have just been so out of control. So rain falling in areas we need it, but also flood watch is in effect here in a lot of places where we have the fires right now. And that's a result of rain falling in locations where we now have ash, burned timber, burned grasses, where you don't necessarily have live vegetation holding the ground back. And so that's a problem for us. Yes, love to see this over the next 7 days, that's for sure. That's going to help put out some of these fires, or at least help firefighters contain them. But the risk does become that heavy rain that loosens and weakens these soils here because there's not much of a root system anymore in place. And so you start out with maybe just a little trickle here as the rain comes down and falls on the sediment that we have here. And the next thing you know, you've got a flat out mud flow here, especially in any areas where you have pretty steep terrain, and in the west we have very steep terrain, and then down it flows in any neighborhood that might be downstream is in trouble. You can get a lot of things that happen within that. It's a lot of mud, it's debris, it's pieces of trees, it's boulders, all these kind of things. And so 25 to 50 people die each year, Jackie, alarming numbers.
Yeah, that's a high number. Well, coming up next on Weather Underground, we got lots more to get to in the tropics, including our newest Greek named storms, Alpha and Beta.
The storm. Every second counts. Deadline to disaster. Tonight on the Weather Channel.
season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
We, of course, are tracking the tropics very closely for you here. Hurricane season is a long way from over. It goes all the way through the end of November, and sometimes we've seen storms happen outside of that end of the season. We've got Hurricane Teddy out there. It's a major hurricane in the Atlantic, not threatening land at the current time. Puerto Rico down here to your left, and the Virgin Islands as well. But 125-mile-per-hour winds, northwest movement at 14. We think it is going to still cause some issues with high surf in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Tomorrow should be a much better day to be in the water, but a little bit dangerous for you this evening. And you see where this could be headed, and it takes a little bit of a wiggle as it heads past Bermuda as potentially a Category 3 or high-end Category 2 hurricane here. There's a trough that might nudge it just a little bit briefly off to the east here, but you can see the wave height forecast. Little nudge there by a trough that kicks in, but this is all, by the way, the next a front that slides on through. It's going to cool our temperatures off, by the way, and maybe just helps us save Bermuda here. Bermuda under tropical storm watch, but then the track will continue on as there are some weaknesses in the steering flow there, the upper air pattern and how it pushes Teddy. And you can see how the European model then brings it back towards, say, Nova Scotia here. Could still see some effects here in New England. I think some high surf is still very possible for us here. So just something to watch. But Halifax, we're keeping an eye on you. You could be dead center of the cone. Things could change over the course of time here, and it could be a few days before it hits. But all in all, how often do we see it happens every now and then, but don't often see a direct hit in the Canadian Maritimes. All right, let's talk a little bit more about another place being hit tonight, and that is Portugal, Dr. Nab, and newly named Alpha today.
Yes, it's not the first time that Portugal has had a tropical system come ashore, but it certainly doesn't happen very often. That's subtropical storm Alpha. We do have a lot of other things to watch in the tropics, post-tropical Paulette, and this tropical wave is about to come off the coast of Africa. I have to watch that one. Wilfred, though, is going to struggle because of a lot of wind shear in the middle of the Atlantic. Another reason why this year has reminded me of 2005, for obvious reasons, the number of named storms, is the activity in the northeastern Atlantic today. If you look at history, we had something like this happen in 2005. I'll show you in a little bit. But what's going on? There's this big upper level and mid-level non-tropical low pressure system. But that doesn't even look subtropical, but you got to look a little more closely. Look at this little guy. It was a really small subtropical storm that formed over the waters that were just warm enough in the 70s there to support a subtropical storm, and that made landfall in Portugal earlier this afternoon. Max winds were about 50 miles an hour when it came ashore. Now they've decreased, and it's going to weaken very quickly over land. But if you look in history, again, in 2005, we had a subtropical storm named Vince in very similar area, and then shortly after that became the farthest east that a hurricane has ever first formed, and then it became the only tropical cyclone to come ashore on the Iberian Peninsula as a tropical depression. This one today was a subtropical storm that was a little stronger when it came ashore, but not as a tropical system, as a subtropical system. Now, we've had a lot of other systems that have affected this part of the Atlantic. Here is a system that came ashore. This is Chloe. That was a tropical storm that went just north of Portugal. So we've had tropical storms that reached a place farther east than that. Faith in 1966 was a hurricane north of Ireland. So we've had systems this far north and east. This is just the farthest north and east that something has become a named storm that far east. Helene used to be the farthest east system to first become a tropical storm. So now we've set another record Jackie, so 2020, like 2005, a lot of records being set.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to keep track of all of them, right? So here we go with Beta, as you mentioned, the next storm. And just like the last 20 named storms that we've had so far this season, it's the earliest for that letter or that name. So we started things out. Take a look at that with Arthur back in May. I mean, hurricane season doesn't start till June 1st. So that, was almost an indication of what was to come. We had a couple of named storms through June. Of course, we remember Cristobal. July started to pick up, but really it's been August. It's been September, where we've had so many storms and just name after name after name. And we've got more to come, unfortunately, as well. But the latest record that we've broken with that 23 is the number of named storms up to this point in the season. So we are ranking number 1 there. Typically, up to this point, we'd have roughly 8 named storms. As for hurricanes, we've had 8. That's also the most we've ever had up to this point into the season. But Category 3, so this is interesting for major hurricanes. We've only had 2 so far, and that is about average. So we're a little bit behind on the major hurricanes, but that's certainly a-okay with me. Warm water temperatures, light wind shear, robust tropical waves coming off of Africa, Mike, certainly spells for a busy season.
And a lot of season still to go. Coming up on Weather Underground, no rest for the Gulf Coast. On the heels of Sally, we've got Tropical Storm Beta, more on the threat and where it might strike next.
Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Okay, come over to your TV, put down that pizza, and look at this. This is crazy. Conditions just really going downhill fast. This tree, no match for a tropical storm force winds in Vietnam, comes crashing right down on top of that motorcyclist. Fortunately, there you see him. Ooh, man, the person was able to untangle themselves from the branches and seek help. But this really just goes to show you how quickly things can go downhill. I don't know what that person was doing out there in the first place, riding your bike in these kind of conditions. Unfortunately, one person was killed and dozens of homes were damaged. Mike, that's crazy.
Boy, I got such a close call, right? And got to walk away from that. Scary stuff for sure. But, the mopeds and the scooters are like a way of life, in some of these places. And so, it's how you get from point A to point B, but lucky for sure. Hey, welcome back in. You are watching Weather Underground on this Friday evening. I'm Mike Bettis.
And I'm Jackie Jarris, and if you're just joining us, a lot has happened in the last 6 hours has it been, Mike?
It's crazy. I mean, from lunchtime to dinner time, things just took off in the tropics again.
Yeah, so don't tune out at all this weekend, right? Because we're going to have a lot more updates and a lot of changes to come. The tropics continue to be very, very active. We've got 3 new named systems today alone. Not to mention, we've got major hurricane out there, Teddy, which is still brewing, and we still have areas to watch. So let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Nav. It was funny today. Everybody thought that our Gulf system would get named first, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard, if everybody was hearing the story that I told a little while ago about how close we got to the Gulf system being named Wilfred. Yeah. Because this morning, there was going to be a Hurricane Hunter aircraft from the Air Force going in there. And they were going to fly out to the depression, and then lightning, I think, struck the plane, and they couldn't go fly into the depression, which might have found winds to make it a tropical storm for the 11 a.m. advisory, which could have been named before Wilfred got the name in the East Atlantic at 11 a.m. And then Alpha got named after that, like around midday, and then after that is when Beta got named this afternoon. So if that plane hadn't gotten affected by lightning, this might be named Wilfred, because the satellite estimates this morning were right on that threshold between depression and tropical storm. But anyway, what's in a name, right? Beta is going to cause just the same hazards no matter what name it got. And some of these hazards, wind, water, or both, could end up being pretty serious, pretty life-threatening for some of you. So don't tune out on this just because it's a low-end tropical storm and not moving toward the coast yet, because that's going to change. As it moves north-northeastward in the short term, we're pretty confident that it's going to move closer to the coast. Now, it probably isn't going to follow this exact path. It's probably going to be a lot more inconsistent in its motion, but generally, somewhere in this area, it is going to be moving toward the coast. Closer it gets to the coast, the worse the chances of heavy rain we'll get, regardless of what the intensity is. And later tonight and tomorrow morning, because we might be within about 48 hours of the expected time of arrival of winds of tropical storm force, we could get hurricane watches, tropical storm watches, storm surge watches going up for a good portion of the Texas coast later tonight or tomorrow morning. So do not tune out later tonight and throughout the weekend. You got to stay tuned in to see what happens and how your area might be affected, because things could really change a lot. Remember how much the cone for Sally changed? This could be the same way. When steering currents are weak, that's what happens. Weak high pressure to the north is going to steer it generally toward the west. And then the European model depiction there, the colors of the low-level spins show it affecting nearly all of the Texas coast in one way or another, and then even passing over Louisiana. At what strength with what specific impacts, hard to say. But just because you're not in the cone in Louisiana doesn't mean you're not eventually going to have to deal with this. So look at what this could look like on Sunday as it gets closer to the coast. That's when the threat of heavy rains and flooding increases. And then if it stays as close to the coast as this model shows, we could be dealing with possibly really heavy rains in deep South Texas, and then maybe really heavy rains for just about everybody else along the Texas coast. Houston, Beaumont at risk, Mike. So, you know, I can hear it now. People thinking, well, this isn't that strong. It's offshore. I'm not that worried about it.
Hey, Dr. Knapp, why don't you answer a quick question from a viewer, if you can hear. This one from Jane. Is it possible to retire a Greek letter as a storm name if the storm is historic in its impact?
Well, the plan right now is that they would designate a devastating Greek-named hurricane as being on the retired list, but they would still use it again in the future if they have to dip into the Greek alphabet. I don't like that, Mike. I think we should come up with a 7th name list with the complete auxiliary list of names to use.
Okay, Limu, you said it.
It's hurricane season. It's been so 2020. You know what we're talking about, right? We've had 4 landfalling tropical systems in just the last 6 weeks. There was Hurricane Isaias in North Carolina on August 3rd. Fast forward to August 25th, we had Tropical Storm Marco at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Just 2 days later, Hurricane Laura makes landfall in Cameron, Louisiana as a Category 4. Then just this week, another hit for the Gulf Coast as Hurricane Sally made landfall at Gulf Shores, Alabama as a Category 2 hurricane. Now, the damage caused by those storms extensive, but will they be added to the list of billion-dollar disasters this year? Take a look at the billion-dollar disasters that we have already. You go back to January, we had the big southeast tornadoes. You go through February, March, we had the big Tennessee tornadoes, the ones that hit Nashville. Then down through early April, North Central and Ohio Valley hailstorms there. So 5 severe disasters that cost at least $1 billion. And then they started adding up after that, too. From April through late May, 5 more severe weather events that cost at least $1 billion, meaning 5 severe outbreaks, Jackie, totaling minimum $10 billion.
Wow, so NOAA's list was just last updated on July 8th, by the way, and it did not include a single tropical storm or hurricane. We really only had Cristobal up by that time, but based on damage estimates, here are a few of the storms that we think could get added to the list. So let's start out with Hurricane Isaias making landfall in Ocean Isle Beach, North Carolina, back on August 3rd. The storm then moved its way up the eastern seaboard, taking down trees and knocking out power to nearly 3 million customers. Early insurance estimates put the cost of this storm at $4 billion in the U.S. Then on August 27th, we had Hurricane Laura struck Cameron Parish, Louisiana. Estimated damage in Louisiana ranges from between $8 to $12 billion, mostly attributed to property damage. And while it's still too early to know the extent of all of the property damage yet caused by Hurricane Sally, estimates to agricultural losses are already beginning to come out. It's believed that Laura devastated more than 757,000 acres of timber and agriculture. That loss has been estimated at a price tag of $1.6 billion. So that's at least 3 more on the list. While tropical systems are often the most expensive natural disasters, they're not necessarily the most frequent. So take a look at this, showing you the type of billion-dollar disaster in what part of the country is most likely. So you can see Florida typically has the most in terms of the tropics, but look at a place like Texas, Louisiana, even at the Carolinas. It's severe storms that typically get your billion-dollar disasters. And in New England, it's wintry weather in the west of course, it is the drought and the wildfires. And there you can see we've had 115 of them for severe storms. And Mike, we've got more tropical weather potentially ahead of us.
Tons, no doubt. And based on that list that Jackie just showed you, we think there could be a couple of other different types of disasters that could make the list outside of the tropics. Remember the derecho that struck in the heartland in early August? We saw winds topping 120 miles an hour. This is Marshalltown, Iowa with the derecho. It hit a dozen different, produced a dozen different tornadoes as well. Hit 6 different states. Ongoing in the West. Hundreds of thousands of acres in California and then Washington and Oregon, totaling millions altogether. The fires have incinerated half a dozen small towns. In the town of Talent here in Oregon, fire retardant not enough to keep this neighborhood from being reduced to ashes. Now, recovering from these billion-dollar disasters, it can take, we know, years. 3 years after Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico, more than 20,000 people still homeless. Today, the Trump administration approved a nearly $13 billion grant to help rebuild the electrical grid and schools that were damaged in the wake of Maria. Bringing back in Jackie, our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. And a lot of people would say, you know, when it comes to infrastructure in this country, we're spending our money in all the wrong places. But you talk about today's announcement, Dr. Knabb. They're going to reinforce the electrical grid, reinforce schools here. This has got to be a step in the right direction because it doesn't seem like we're doing enough to mitigate natural disasters in this country.
Right. It's about building back better and not just repeating the cycle of build, destroy, build back the way it was. You know, and there's 2 major areas in which we can do better. That is, be careful about where we build in the first place and then how strong we build.
And what about existing places, Dr. Knabb? Does it make sense to reinforce or build up some of the infrastructure that we already have?
Sure, and you know, there's been some recent surveys of the American public, and there is a widespread support for paying for making our infrastructure stronger, paying for moving some communities that want to go out of repetitive flood loss locations. And there's been a little bit of money that has been added to the federal budget to increase mitigation spending at the local and state level, but it's a tiny amount compared to what these disasters cost.
Yeah, it's alarming when you think about it. You think about over the course of decades, our society has advanced so much, but the cost and the number of people dying from natural disasters keeps going up decade by decade.
Yeah, we're still more reactive than we are proactive.
And we're in the time of climate change as well.
All right. Hey, why don't you stick around, everyone? We come back here on Weather Underground. Back to the tropics. They are active once again. 3 named storms just today. We're going to run down those for you coming up.
This weekend, catch a new episode of Weather Gone Viral. When a heat wave hits, some people find inventive ways to cool off.
We ain't hot, not never in Daytona Beach. We know how to survive.
There are those of us who do nothing and complain. And then there are true heroes like this gentleman who's not going to let a broken AC unit in his car be a problem.
The guy straps a portable air conditioning unit to his back window with the generator on the roof of his car. Now that right there is ingenuity if I've ever seen it.
And in this heat, you can either stay in or stand out.
This is Daytona Beach, so if you're riding the loop, you need something to stand out, right? This guy has it figured out. And he's got air conditioning. Win-win.
That's what I'm talking about.
Don't they say necessity is the mother of all invention? That's right. Check out Weather Gone Viral Sunday night, 9, 8 Central, right here on the Weather Channel. Now, if we could just come up with some kind of invention to make all these tropical storms and hurricanes stop, Dr. Nab.
Oh, wouldn't
Don't
that
you
be
have the
nice?
power to do that?
No, I'm sorry. I joke with my family that I have an app that only I have on my phone that I can swipe the storms in the direction that I want to keep them safe. But
you go this way, you go that way.
Oh, yeah, but when it doesn't go one direction, it's good news for somebody, bad news for somebody else. Now, we could get the intermediate public advisory from the Hurricane Center on Tropical Storm Beta while I'm talking. They like to do that to me. Well, we'll see how it goes. But we're going to get the intermediate public advisory momentarily. As of the 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central Time advisory, max winds were at 40 miles an hour, motion north-northeast at 9. And the storm is a bit sheared, but if you look at how it's been progressing during the afternoon and evening, you got a pretty substantial blowup of thunderstorms that are just out of radar range there on the visible. Switch over to the infrared, you can see how persistent and deep the convection is in this northeastern quadrant. It's really blossoming. Fortunately, we don't have to just estimate it based on the satellite. We do have aircraft reconnaissance out there, but even aircraft recon data requires careful interpretation and has some inherent limitations. This peak a couple of hours ago when the Air Force plane was going through that northeastern part might have been inflated artificially by heavy rain rates. And also, the closer you are to the coast, the more some wave action and shallow waters can contaminate the instrument that's measuring the wind speed at the surface. So I don't think it's a hurricane. I don't think the max winds are that strong, but maybe they're a little stronger than 40 miles an hour. There have been a few spots that have eked up above that. So in the intermediate public advisory, it's possible that they'll bring the wind speeds up a little bit. I don't think it's a hurricane. But it is forecast to become a hurricane at some point as it generally moves toward the coast. But it could get farther north, so this part of the cone is in play during the weekend, as is this part. Don't count on this storm to follow that line down the middle. That's just to give you an idea of where the forecast points are and what the timing is. And it might not even adhere to that timing. It could go farther inland. It could stay farther offshore. But in any case, the overall sense is that this storm is likely to get closer to the coast as the weekend goes on. Hurricane and storm surge watches are likely to go up later tonight or tomorrow morning for some or good portion of the Texas coast and Louisiana. Just because you're not in the cone yet doesn't mean you don't have a risk eventually. Sunday is the first day I think we're going to have an increasing risk of rain-induced flooding, and the closer it gets to the coast, the greater that risk will get, and I think the risk will continue to climb on Monday and Tuesday. Jackie, we could have, again, not just inches, but feet of rainfall.
Yeah, so keep watching us throughout the weekend, Dr. Nab. Thanks. Hey, switching gear, check it out. 4 more days to the autumnal equinox. How about that? But millions will be feeling fall-like conditions from the Midwest to the East Coast, even parts of the Southeast this weekend. Happy Friday night, everybody. We're going to finish things off here with some good news with our fall cold front that's going to be sweeping all across the region. Got a trough, the jet stream dipping down, especially across the Great Lakes into the Northeast right now. High pressure here at the surface is going to be ushering in that drier air as well. And look at how far south that cold front goes, all the way down into parts of Florida. So it's going to be refreshing, perhaps for some, and frosty for others. We've got frost and freeze alerts in effect from the Midwest into the interior parts of the Northeast, where some record lows could be in jeopardy. Tomorrow morning, you'll be waking up to about 34 degrees in Binghamton. If we hit that, that breaks the old record of 35 degrees. The weekend really looks good. Overall, lots of sunshine. We'll have clear skies into the Northeast. Temperatures about 10 to 15 degrees below average here. Of course, watching the Gulf Coast, and all eyes, of course, on what's now Tropical Storm Beta, and that will be a bigger impact with the heavier rain moving in on your Sunday. But to the north of there, Kansas City, 77 degrees, 72 in Chicago. The west looks dry as well. And I hope you enjoy a great weekend. Dr. Neb's going to be back with another look at it.
Tropical Storm Beta in the Gulf of Mexico expected to strengthen, forecast to become a hurricane. Max winds at 40 miles an hour, moving north-northeast at 9, but it will be slowing down and getting closer to the coast as the weekend goes on. Now, a moment ago, I said you're going to get an intermediate public advisory. My bad. There's not watches up. There's no tropical storm or hurricane or storm surge watches up for the coast yet. When that starts happening later tonight or tomorrow morning, then we'll get the intermediate public advisories coming from the Hurricane Center. Now, in my defense, there are coastal flood watches that are up. This could get changed to storm surge watches. That onshore push will get worse as the storm gets closer. And we're getting close to that 48-hour time window when winds of tropical storm force will start arriving maybe late Sunday night into early Monday morning. That's why the watches will go up later tonight or tomorrow morning, because we're going to be 2 days in advance. And here's the cone. It will generally be getting closer to us over the weekend. Expect the cone to change because the steering currents are not going to be well defined, but bottom line is a hurricane is what is forecast to be moving closer to the coast over the next few days, with the possibility of very heavy rains along any portion of the Texas coast and heads up in Louisiana as well. Well, for all of us here at Weather Underground, thank you so much for watching. Have a great night and a great weekend. And remember, together, we know more.
And now your tropical update. Here's the latest advisory. A look from above. The latest forecast track.
A lot of danger.